Welcome everyone. Tonight we're joined by Dr. Hussein Adia, and he's going to be sharing from his book Foreigner and about his experiences as a Baha'i in Iran growing up, and also as a young man in, living in New York City.
از تو اما به تو آمدم، قلبم را به نور معرفتت منیر فرما. تویی مقتدری که قدرت عالم و من از اقتدارت باز نداشت. از یک اشراق از نیر کرمت دریاهای کرم ظاهر، و از یک تجلی از نیر جودت عالم وجود موجود. ای پروردگار، آنچه لایق ایامت نیست عکس نما، و آنچه قابل است عطا فرما. تویی آن بخشنده‌ای که بخششش محدود به حدود نه. عباد توییم، تو را می جوییم و از تو می طلبیم. تویی فضا، تویی بخشنده، تویی فضا و تویی بخشنده.
Thank you for everyone for joining us. Would you like to start, Hussein?
Yep. Hussein, the floor is yours.
While this young man was chanting this beautiful prayer, actually she had a wonderful chanting ability. I've never heard him before. It reminded me what happened one time in one of the feasts in Tehran. You know that most prayers in Persian, when they start the feast or gathering, is all chanted very melodiously and nicely. Some, of course, have a much better ability to deliver, and some don't. So in one of those feasts, there was a new Baha'i, and they wanted him to participate in the program, so they gave him the letter that has come from National Assembly. You know, the same thing here, you have a letter from National Assembly that is read to the friends. So he listened to devotional part. They all chanted beautiful prayer. Now finally came to his turn, and the poor guy, a new Baha'i, his first feast, he thought that he also have to chant the message. And he started to say, "Oh, dear friends, on October 15, in our gathering, we decided, and on and on. So he chanted the whole message from national, that, you know, what we decided, what we're going to do, and all that. So here's some Persian chanting. What are you listening to? So this, I thought I'd just share with you. I heard this one from some friends. Oh, another story about chanting. Many of you probably have heard about the hand of a cause, Mr. Samandri was a wonderful man. He was in New York just a short time before he died. There was a large gathering and he was the speaker. And before the meeting started, he asked, he said, Mrs. Rouhani, could you chant and start the meeting? So, you know, Persian do what they call a ta'aruf. You know, they always say no, no, and you have to insist so they accept. Oh, he said, no, Mr. Samandri, I have such an awful voice. Please excuse me. So, okay. Then Mr. Samandri turned to the other woman. He said, Mrs. Nisagi, could you chant? I have a cold, I have a sore throat, my voice is not that good, so I'm sorry, I cannot do it. So then he turned to the third person. He said, okay, Tatiana, or Persian, you chant the prayer. So this poor woman started to chant, and her chanting was not that great, but she tried. So when she finished, Mr. Samandri told her, dear friend, next time, even when Mr. Samandri asks you to chant, you don't have to. You are excused. So these are the stories I remember from this wonderful friends who chant. You know, until recently, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, in the West, they would discourage from the friend to chant anything in English. Otherwise, when you read the English prayer, you just read it, you know, very simple way. Because some friends wanted to imitate what they do in Iran and chant a prayer, and it was discouraged by national authors. But nowadays, of course, it's become popular and they're doing it all over the place. So these are my little bit of knowledge about chanting and prayer I thought I'd share with you. But to go to the main subject of our presentation tonight, some time ago, there's a wonderful publishing house in England called George Ronald. Probably most of you have heard about them. Like they've been in existence for the last 50, 60, 70 years. They have published a great number of books, Baha'i and non-Baha'i books. And they have a wonderful editorial board and all that. So they asked me if I could do some research and write a book about the plight and problem that the Baha'i community, especially those Baha'is who are from a smaller village and town, have faced last 50, 60, 70 years. And then try to make it more humanized, pick up some example of some few that they have gone through those turmoil and put it in the form of a book. That's how this book, Foreigner, came about. That is really a story of the difficulties and the plight of the Baha'i community in Persia, in the villages and the small towns. And since I came from a very small town, it's called Nayriz, which is in the southern part of Persia. It's about 200 kilometers south of Shiraz. I hope you all know about Shiraz. Shiraz is one of the most beautiful cities in Iran, is the home for Sa'di and Hafez, and the two great mystic and poet of that land who used to live 700, 800 years ago. And many of their work has been translated and available in English. So our life in that village, which was quite simple, and the town itself really has not changed, I would say, for last couple of thousand years. When I see sometimes movies about the life of Jesus or life of Moses, and they show the life in Israel, in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem and that area, the way the houses look like at that time, it very much reminded me of my town. There was no electricity, there was no running water, there was no roads. What else? Anyway, we were missing the basic necessity of life. But then the town was an agricultural town. The shepherds and others that had goats and cows and lamb, and life was going on very routine and very monotonous. It happened that by accident or by providence, over 200 years ago, a great number of people in this town became Baha'i and then Baha'i. But of course, it's a detailed history, which is not, I don't want to share this time with you. A man by the name Wahid came to town. He was a leading mullah or Ayatollah, we can call him, of Persia, and he was a Baha'i. And by him coming, he was able to convert half the population of the city to new faith, which is Baha'i and later on known as Baha'i. So historically, this minority of this village were subject to all kind of abuse and persecution. And this was not just unique to my hometown, it was true all over Iran. So little by little, the pressure of the life in that small town the small towns around the country was so much that the great number of them began to leave those small towns and move to the bigger cities like Tehran, which is the capital of Persia, Shiraz, or Isfahan. These are some of the beautiful cities in that country. How we end up living, that was my father was a prominent Baha'i in town. What they call him, he was a secretary for the governing body of town, the local spiritual assembly, as you know. And the large community, 2,000-3,000 Baha'is used to live there. And so often he was subject of attack and ridicule and physical abuse. In one occasion, for example, they kidnapped him. There was a mullah in town, which was not a very nice guy. He asked some of his henchmen who were highway robbers on the mountain. They kidnapped him and they hold him in the mountain for 2-3 days. And eventually some Muslim who were friendly with our family, they went to rescue him, and he was broken and bleeding, nose and face. And for some mysterious way, those people who were kidnapping him, they were all shot to death the following day. Which I'm sure the Baha'is have nothing to do with that. There was a friction between the Muslim groups. So that occasion and variety of other, they torch, for example, he had a small drugstore in the business area of town. They torched that store and he had no business to continue. So one day he decided he had enough of that. At that point, I was 6 years old, and he and I, we had 2 small chamadan or suitcase. We got on the top of a truck because there was no transportation, there was no buses. The only way you could get around was a truck that was coming from some villages to towns and all that. We got on top of a truck and we left Nayriz and we went to Shiraz. This happened, of course, to many other families from my town and from other places. And as a matter of fact, a bunch of them actually migrated at that point to some of the Persian Gulf countries like Kuwait, Dubai, Qatar, and other places. And now they are very wealthy and very prominent in those places. In search of job, we went from city to city. Poor man was quite anxious to find a job to bring his family out of Nayriz. And eventually we end up in a city called Abadan. Abadan is an interesting town. It's a British oil company built the biggest oil refinery in that city because Iran is one of the largest, have the largest deposit of the oil. So they would refine the oil in that city, and there was all kind of tanker who were landing right on the Persian Gulf, and they would take the oil all over the world. So the city was influenced by the British culture, by American, by Indian, and all that. So relatively, they were more tolerant toward the Baha'is and others. And I want to also share this point with you, that the persecution that was going on at that time, and especially intensified in 1979, with coming of Khomeini to power, it was not just against the Baha'is. The Sufis, the Armenian, the Christian, the Jews, the Kurds, they were all minority who were subject to abuse and oppression. So I don't want to forget about that. Also, I just want to mention that my dislike of what I went through is not toward Persia and my country. It's toward those elements and those people who really oppressed us. Then, of course, after a while you forgive and you forget them. But I want to know that I still love Persia, and hopefully one day I can return for a visit. Not to stay, just for a visit to do it. 1979 was another horrible night, horrible year. That was another revolution took place in Iran. It's called Islamic Republic Islamic Revolution. Khomeini came to power, and then again massive oppression of Baha'is started. Many of them were put to death, they were hanged, they were tortured, and thousands of them were forced to leave the country. They came to America, almost 20,000 of them. They went to Australia, they went to Canada, they went to Europe, and they spread all over the world. Of course, majority of them, there are hundreds of thousands of Baha'is in Persia, they didn't have this chance of getting out. Or at the same time, some of them, they don't even wanted to get out. They thought this is their land, they were born, and they stayed there, and they were really also the hero of this fate, because they could withstand all the pressure and all the problems. What happened was the family of these people who were so oppressed, and they left, they came to these Western countries. 90% of them became very successful in terms of educating their children, securing good jobs, and becoming a contributing Baha'i to the society and to the administration of the faith. They had fireside, they serve in assembly, they contribute. So even though on the surface, many of these people suffer because they were uprooted from their country, but at the same time, it helped the Baha'i faith. And actually, because of the persecution, the coverage in media and the press was so much that it really increased the visibility of our faith. Life in Abadan was kind of pleasant because, as I said, was the influence of British and American and all that. Days I spent there, and I had a pleasant time those days. The biggest, the highest, or the most critical point that happened when at some point the Prime Minister of Persia, a fellow by name Mossadegh, declared and nationalized the oil company. He kicked out the British companies, and there was a major international crisis in the country. The case came in front of the nation. The UN sided with Persia, but then British, with the help of American, quarantined the country. They would not allow any trade take place. The sanction was quite severe, and eventually they arranged a coup and got rid of Mossadegh. And so that left a bad taste in the mouth of many Persians. My city was not very pleasant. I remember, for example, there was a month in Islamic calendar called Muharram, which is the month that the grandson of Prophet Muhammad by the name Hussein was martyred over 1,000 years ago. And still the good Shia Muslim, they commemorate that occasion. That month was a horrible month for Baha'is throughout Persia. because they go to mosque, they listen to some exciting sermon by a mullah or by a priest or minister, and then they leave the mosque and they are in kind of frenzy, and they often attack the Baha'i community and attack the Baha'is. I very much remember in one of those occasions, we saw a mob was coming out of the mosque, and my family and my brother, my mother maybe, we run inside our house, we close the door. We didn't get the chance to get our dog inside. It was such a cute, sweet dog. And then these unfair people, they stoned him to death. So these are the things that I remember from those days. One thing that also I remember, and I'm going to read about it for you, I picked up two pieces of writing from the book to give you a sample of how the book is written. Thanks to my good friend Hilary Chapman, the co-author of the book. It was my idea and some of his great writing that has produced a quite interesting book called Foreigner. It's one of the best-selling Baha'i books in the last couple of years, and they are very happy with its publication. Shall we show on the screen the things? No, I don't.
I think you should just read.
I just read it. Okay. The first piece that I'm going to read, this is from the book. And after this, I have a collection of pictures that Anne is going to show. And then with those pictures, I can make a little more comment, and then we go to some question and answer. This is how the first section of the book. I remember only darkness when the sun went down, except for a small kerosene lamp, hazy orange glow into which the occasional indistinct figure would appear and then disappear. I remember torrent of refuse and mud running over the unpaved street when it rained. I remember women covering dark chador, moving like shadows. I remember mullahs in the mosque exhorting the faithful to weep for the martyrs. I remember Nayriz as a sad society of timeless routine permeated by ignorance. Our small agricultural town in 1942 probably had, this is when I was born, probably had not changed much in its 1,000 years of existence. At dawn, farmer and shepherds headed out to their orchards in the hill, following the footsteps of their grandfathers and their grandfathers. People went to and fro over the unpaved road outside the wooden door of our home. Our two-story clay and brick house sat on the corner of Main Road and a canal, the later would swallow with water during the cold, rainy season. Even to the point 1 year of flooding our house. When it was dry, the canal had become our playground. The local boys and I used whatever stick and stone happened to be laying around for our games. 2 shiny marbles were my prized possession. And to this day, the sparkle of a sunlight on the glass of the marble remind me of my boyhood. The only windows in our house were small on the second floor. The roof was bounded by a short wall and could be used for defense. We were Baha'is in a town of Muslim, many of whom were hostile toward us, and our house was at the edge of a neighborhood where Baha'i family huddled together for protection. My father's small pharmacy in Bazaar had been torched, so he had moved his remaining stock into a small space next to our house, where he could eke out a living selling curative powders and herbs. I have some other
Maybe at the end after
I could read that later, but then maybe no, I can take a break and begin to show some pictures. Thank you, Anne. This is the front of the book. Foreigner is a wonderful designer by the name
Rainer Steiner.
Renee Steiner, who has made this design. And actually, it's so interesting. I have asked him recently to also make a design for us for my other book, Tahara of Persia and Contemporary American. We're going to have a new edition of that book, and he's also going to design for us the new cover of our book. Next. Oh, this is wonderful. This is my good friend Anne is a talented girl. I just I described to her my life in the village. You know, our means of transportation was on donkey, and I used to ride the donkey constantly because one of my main jobs in our household was to go and get water from the spring, which was about a couple of kilometers away from our house. Maybe I was 5, 6, 7 years old. We would put some kind of container in the back of the donkey. I would ride the donkey. I would go to the spring place, fill up this container called kuze, and then bring them back the water to our house. And that was my contribution. So this donkey, and that's me, the work of Anne. And it's kind of similar. The original thing that he did, she made me a little bigger, fatter than I used to be. So we asked her to thin me out a little bit, and she did a good job. Thank you, Anne. Next. This is the typical roads and streets and alleyways of the city. This must be a new picture because I see some electric lines there.
Yeah.
They have added to it. So at the time that I remember, there was no such thing. But I don't think so. Steps and the houses has not changed much. This is the mosque. The mosque in the town is a very historic mosque. And this is one of the things that Nayriz is famous for, because that mosque was built during Zoroastrian time and used to be a temple more than 1,000 years ago, before Muslim and Arabs came to Persia. And they have converted the temple that Zoroastrian used to pray, and they made a mosque out of it. And this is the courtyard of the mosque. This is the inside the mosque that the believers would go and pray. This is, I think I was kind of cute. This is, my aunt, this of course, this is after we moved out my village, we went to Abadan. And this picture most likely was taken in Abadan. This is me and my aunt, and I think I look pretty good in that picture. One thing you have to remember in Persia and Islamic culture, you are not allowed to do much painting or sculpting or music and things like this. What they concentrate and they are famous for is calligraphy. You know, the way they write and the way they play with the boards and all that. And it happened that one of my ancestors, through my mother's side, he was one of the greatest calligraphers in Islamic world. I think he was living 16th or 17th century. His work actually is in all major museums around the world. One time, actually, with my family, we went to Metropolitan Museum in New York, and casually I asked a man, one of the information, somebody, do you have any work by calligraphy work by Mirza Ahmad Nayrizi? And he looked in the catalog and computer and said, yes, you go to the Persian section, the area 425, and you would find some of his work. And then somebody just sent me an email, shows one of the, he put the Quran together, and it was just sold for $7 million by Christie. So I wish he would have left some of this money for us, but I guess all we got now is a statue in Shiraz and Nayriz to show that what a prominent calligrapher he was. And it's so funny that the man who was so prominent calligrapher, how little he knew that his descendants, they all become Baha'i. Probably either he's happy or he's turning his grave. Next. This is my grandfather in a typical old-fashioned outfit. this was before the people were forced to change and to modernize and wear European suits, pants, and jacket and all that. But now, unfortunately, with the new regime, they all have gone back to the same old-fashioned way. So my grandfather's fashion is back. Was it? That's my grandmother. She was a happy woman. I love this woman. Sahib John was her name. And her main, what I remember about her, and she was known for, there were lots of tablets and other that was received by Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha for the family and others. And she was always concerned safeguarding those tablets. And they said, whenever there was an attack on our house, whenever there was a flood, whenever there was some natural disaster, all she would say, save the tablet, save the tablet. And because of this effort that she put in this area, many tablets was saved and was recently descended to Haifa to become part of the archive and all that. And quite a number of them in the handwriting of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and quite a valuable collection of stuff. God bless her soul. She was a sweetheart. That's my father. He's kind of good-looking guy. He run in the family. Next. One thing, I put this picture, thank you, Tatiana. This is a typical Baha'i summer school. I think this was in Shiraz. The Baha'i gathering, Baha'i center for the Baha'is was really a haven of safety and of pleasure and getting together and feel secure and chant the prayers and listen to a good talk and enjoy the other people's company, find yourself a wife or a husband, and all that. This was I have a very good memory. I think most likely I'm in this picture somewhere.
Here.
Am I there?
Yeah.
And so this was in Shiraz was a great Baha'i scholar by the name of Ashraf Khabari, who was teaching that summer. And we all attended his lectures.
In Chehrenegar.
And Chehrenegar was another one, yeah. Very good, Tatiana. Okay, next. Oh, this I thought is quite interesting. Good symbol of the modern and old-fashioned. This is my great aunt riding a donkey when she came to. She and her husband used to live in Tehran. So they were part of the upper class, civilized city dweller. But they came to visit us. Well, of course, they have to get around. So we have to give them a donkey so she could around. And this man who was very serious and very stiff all the time, Mr. Daragahi, is helping him to carry him from place to place. Oh, I should tell you a story about this Mr. Daragahi that I was told. He was, what happened when you have this phobia that you think you can always get the germ or disease if you use somebody else's cough or what they call it? There's a word for that.
Yeah, hypochondriac.
What's that?
Hypochondria.
That's right. He was so concerned all the time. He was so careful not to touch anything that somebody else has touched, not to share anything and all that. So he ended up going to Haifa during Abdul Baha's time for pilgrims. And what they used to have, of course, this is common practice those days. Abdul Baha would be in a meeting and all the friends would sit around the room. And then sometime Abdul Baha would tell one of the people who work, please bring some warm milk. Because serving, like nowadays you serve a juice or drink or something. Those days, a nice thing to do was to bring some warm milk. So the person brought a pot or a container of warm milk and gave it to Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha had a little bit of zip of milk and gave it to the next one. And so the next one took it some. Oh my God, Mr. Daragahi is sitting there and dreadful. My God, this pot is coming toward him. All these people have drink from the same pot. But eventually, of course, it got to him and there was no way he could refuse it. So he forced himself, so he took the pot and he drank some of that warm milk. And I wonder what he went in his mind at that point. So the pot passed him, he went back to Abdul Baha, and then he thought, thanks God it's finished. Suddenly Abdul Baha said, Mr. Daragahi, would you like to have some more? And so they gave him the pot again. So this, after that, he got rid of his, whatever you call it. What was the word?
Hypochondria.
That he became all right. I love him. I was a sweetheart. Okay, next.
I think that's the end.
That's the end of pictures.
Yep.
That's too nice.
Yep. That's the last one.
I want to finish with the. Shall I read this or shall I tell you the story?
You make it.
What happened is when we were in, this is part of the book. Save your money and buy the book. You would really enjoy it. It's a good book. And if you cannot afford it, put your address in the email, send an email to me, and Tatiana will send you the PDF, and you can read it yourself free. In Abadan, I had an uncle. I don't know why I remember that now. His uncle of mine, my mother's brother, was quite a accomplished man. He was talented. He even became a mayor of a town and all that. But unfortunately, he was addicted to opium. And you know, opium was kind of popular in Persia those days, still are. Because you know, in Islam, drinking alcohol is forbidden. But then opium is allowed and is very popular. So this man was constantly using opium. And often at nighttime, he would go to these places called, I think, Opium Den, which was in the Red District of our town. Because I was such an active boy and was driving everyone crazy, my mother or my aunt and other would ask me, please take Hussein with you. They want to get rid of me. So this guy would take me with him to these places, these warehouses, and this opium den, and I would take my book, my papers, and while they were playing around, and they would pick up a piece of opium and put on the pipe, and smoke it, and have a good time, and have euphoria and all that. They looked so miserable, some of them, that I remember. And I was sitting on some kind of dim light by the door, so I could do my homework. Of course, after a while, they all smoke so much and they get high, and I would fall asleep because, you know, secondhand smoking. My uncle would get up and would leave, and he forget all about me. Many times this happened. I wake up 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the place was deserted, but it's kind of safe, you know. Still, I get up, I collect my books, and I go and I wait in a bus stop, which was next to a movie house called Taj Cinema. And I would go home. And then I realized actually nobody missed me. Because, you know, everybody thought I'm either with my uncle or I'm with my aunt or I'm here, I'm there. So what it's amazing that why I remember there was a number of incidents like this happened in Abadan. Another thing I remember, which was wonderful, they sent me to Tehran to attend this school which was established by the National Assembly for the children who were orphans, or they were children of martyrs, or their parents were going international pioneering, and they couldn't take their kid with me. And because my father was a good friend of Mr. Furutan, who at that time was the Secretary of National Spiritual Assembly, became hand of a cause. He asked them if they could take me to this school. It's called Darul Tarbiyeh, the house of manner. You are supposed to go to that school and to learn some manner. Can you imagine? They sent me this school. I was free of spirit. I used to go with my uncle to the Red District and smoke opium secondhand. Now all of a sudden they sent me to this school to be a good Baha'i and behave myself and all that. Boy, oh boy, for a couple of years, I really suffered. But I did a good job. They are trying to train me, try to educate me. And one thing very interesting was, every time you make a mistake or you do something wrong, the next day they would deprive you from having breakfast. Imagine this was the punishment. If you are a bad boy, no breakfast. The only way that you could escape and have the breakfast if you memorize a prayer. And just before time, you would stand up and recite that prayer by memory, and then you are allowed to sit down and have breakfast. Oh, if you only remember how many prayer I remember in that place, 200-300 prayer, believe me. Now nowadays, when somebody is chanting a prayer in Persian, I may not remember the detail of every word, but the essence of it keep coming back to me because I memorized all this prayer so I could have breakfast. And of course, I have lots of fun memory with Mr. Fulton Handavakas that I will share with you some other occasion. Thank you, friends. If you have any question, hopefully Tatiana can answer. Or I would try to answer you. Okay, thank you, Anne.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Richard.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Did anyone have any questions?
I want you to pray for me because 2 weeks from now, there's a city in Texas called Fort Worth, Texas. Probably you have heard of it. And they somehow the public library in town, they found out about this book, Foreigner, and it looked like there's interest these days in the foreign borns and things that deal with different nationality. So they have asked me to make a presentation on the book. So this was good that I had the chance to talk to you and get some feeling of what I'm going to share. Of course, this is going to be a large number of non-Baha'is in the public library. So we're going to change it slightly and to make it more appealing to a non-Baha'i circles.
Oh, it's wonderful.
So,
Especially for the opium part.
Yeah, the stories are great because then it gives you an idea of what it was like. And you can always, I think there's so many people in America who suffer hardship to get where they were, that if you share your hardship, I think they will feel connected to you, and they will feel connected to the Baha'is, and they'll understand their journey here. Because I think people who are going to come to a talk called Foreigner are probably interested in people from different countries and foreigners themselves. So as much stories you can tell, and maybe a bit more of the persecution so they understand the history of the Baha'is might be good, because we all know this, being Baha'is, probably heard this history, but I think there's some, I'll probably remember your dog from the talk, because that's such a sad, horrible thing to undergo, and people will understand, everybody will understand what it's like to lose a pet or something, like that, right? So that's just a suggestion.
that's very good.
Probably some
What
good
I'm
history.
going to do next week, again, with the permission of Anne, we're going to continue the second part of this presentation. It deals with after I came to America, and after many others come to America, and what foreigner they go through after they arrive here. Forget about the suffering and things like this, which is tremendous. But also when they come here, it's not that easy for them either. And then you burn the bridges behind you, and you have no choice to go forward and try to make best of situation in view of all kind of challenges and difficulties that you face language-wise, financially, culturally, and otherwise.
Yeah, you could call it Coming to America 1 and Coming to America 2.
That's right, exactly. Very good. That's
Like if you want to add some humor,
So the second
people
part
might laugh about that.
is going
And
to be
that's my friend in Haifa from, I believe he was from Mexico, came to the States and his mom moved to LA and she was working for the university and had medical insurance, but he didn't know the name of the university. So he was shouting when he broke his brother broke his leg and they brought him to emergency and he was trying to tell them their medical plan. And he was shouting, "Ukla, Ukla, Ukla," when he was UCLA, basically.
That's
So
right.
just remember, like, nobody understanding that his medical insurance was from Ukla, you know? So everybody remembers stories. Everybody
Actually,
remembers
a couple of
stories.
universities, I'm going to share with you next week, but since you mentioned university, I wanted to come to America, beside being a Baha'i and living in the country, I also want to pursue my education. And somehow, I don't know, I became interested to become a nuclear engineer. I don't know why, but I think those days, Einstein, and Von Braun, and all that popular figures. So
Can I help you? What do you want me to do? You want me to-
So I went to American Embassy and asked for help and they told me there are 2 universities that you can go to become nuclear engineering. You either go to Harvard or you go to Columbia. So they helped me with my poor English, I only knew a few hundred words. I applied both places. Columbia rejected me right away, but somehow Harvard accepted me. My God, we should see the excitement in the family. My father was so proud that his son is going to America and he's going to Harvard. So I came to New York on a boat, actually. You know, I came with the ship to America, and it took us 6-7 days to get here. So when I was staying YMCA downtown, I kept telling people I have to go to Washington to register. But they said, no, you're going to Harvard, you have to go to Boston. I said, no, Washington, Washington. Then I realized I was accepted to Howard University, not Harvard. Somehow, you know, this black university, I'm sure they were quite surprised that why an Iranian is applying to come to their university, but they accepted me. But of course, I didn't go there because I wanted to study engineering and things like this. So that's what happened. Okay, and I was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. You know, that's funny. My dad also went to Howard.
I'll go
Yeah.
to Howard, yes.
Can I make one more suggestion?
Sure, go ahead.
It might be interesting before and after. If you say kind of what your conception of America was before you even arrived, you know, like what people told you and what you thought might be there when you got there, and then what you discovered.
Okay. Actually, my
Is that-
impression of America was just the movies I saw. I started
Yeah.
with Tarzan, and then I ended up with Marilyn Monroe. And Gregory Peck, and Leslie Caron, and Tony Curtis. Oh, I love those. I thought all Americans are like them. They just ride on the highways in the fancy cars with the beautiful air. They look at each other's eyes and they stare at each other and they have a good time. How little I knew. Actually, I came to New York. First thing I discovered was a cold April or March, actually. And I noticed when you walk in the streets, you notice that this smoke is coming out in certain places. Do you know what I'm talking about? Steam.
Yeah, the steam
coming
comes
out.
out
Yeah.
of the way.
So I wrote to my parents, my God, it's such a great city. In the winter time, they warm up the city.
It is warm, like the air from the vent. is warm.
They heat the city.
They warm up the city, they have a steam system.
Which is true in Canada, actually, many years later.
No, it doesn't. They don't heat it up in Prince George.
Thank you, friends. It was a pleasure to have you all. And hope to see you next
Next
weekend.
Sunday.
No, it'll be
Saturday,
16, right?
Next
Yeah, I
Sunday.
think it's Saturday. Let me just go. It should be
Yes.
Saturday. Let's see.
So the follow-on talk of this is going to be next Saturday. There's
Yeah.
a second book
Yes.
coming to America too.
Yes. Coming to America too.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely to see
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Looking forward to part 2.
Everyone.
Aloha.
Thank you, Anne.
Aloha.
Aloha, Padre.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Bye.
It's like John Boy on the Waltons. Good night, John Boy.
I used to love
Good
that.
night, Anna.
Good night. Good night, Miyako.
Good night, Anna.
All right. Good night, Tanya. Good night, Alex.
Good night, Tanya.
All right. Bye.